The first thing I want to do today is do a quiz, which I see some people have already have already entered some things. I want to just take a minute and say, what is it? What words do you associate with Agile? You can put multiple things in there, not just one. And let's just take a minute because I want to see what comes to your mind first, and we'll see what kind of group we have here. Okay, let's take a little look at this. So you can see some of the things that we have. Certainly we have the flexibility, the adaptation, the change, the values, which is great. We also have a lot of process kinds of things. Iterative, sprints, stories, inspecting and adapting, etc. We also have some things that I'm going to talk about today, things like mindset. So this is a sophisticated group we have here, no doubt about it. And I'm glad to see that a lot of you are thinking about people things here as well as just the process things. That's encouraging. Okay, a little bit about me, just so you know who you're dealing with here. So I have this chart here, shows kind of what I did prior to 2002 and then kind of 3 phases of my life, which each led me to write a book about them. The first one is prior to 2002, I've always been in financial software and I've always been in technology. So I kind of started in product management, moved into project management, became CTO of a software company. And then in the Lean Agile focus, I realized after Lean was invented that I'd been doing it for a long time. And I think a lot of us have been doing it for a long time because that's how we worked, right? When early on in this industry, and for those of you who heard Mary Poppendick last week, there wasn't a lot of methods. And so we would just work as people together to get stuff done, and it was engineering. And I had the opportunity going through the first phases of the industry to go through kind of the whole gamut of development of approaches to doing software, from very early waterfall system development methodologies to method 1 that Accenture used a long time ago, to the Microsoft Solutions Framework, which I kind of fell in love with early in my career, to information engineering, to case tools. So I had a lot of opportunity to see different things and to see what worked and what didn't work. Then in the 2002 to 2007 period, I was at Wells Fargo in charge of a group, and we were trying to scale mortgage operations. And the seminal thing for me in that period was an enormous software failure. So Wells Fargo is a great company. We had great business leadership. And we tried to do a very big systems project. I mean, by big, I mean $1 billion plus, to replace all of our origination systems for home lending. And we were the #1 lender in the country by a long ways. And at that time, I learned lean operations because I was running one of the bigger imaging operations in the world. We adopted lean prior to Agile's being invented, right? So we came at Agile from lean. And that kind of shaped a lot of my thinking. I learned a lot about lean manufacturing because of our imaging operations, and then I learned a lot about lean product development. And at the end of this period, this $1 billion project failed, and it was very sad for me because my team had been doing Agile for quite some time. The rest of the group was not. And if you're doing like trying to rebuild a huge origination system and you try to do it in a waterfall way, it's kind of doomed to fail. And so out of that, I wound up having to fire my whole team, and they started the whole project over. Out of kind of a catharsis, I wrote this book called The Tale of Two Systems, which was, the goal of it was to explain to business people what is lean and agile and why do we do it. So I adopted a business novel approach and wrote a story of 2 projects in the same company, one doing it kind of the waterfall-y way and one doing it with more agile approach. And that really helped me form my own views of how things should work and kind of work through why we could have blown $1 billion project that way in a great company with good business leaders. I blame Accenture for most of it. And then, and then after that came the mortgage crisis, and I moved into servicing, running all of the process engineering and technology development for Wells Fargo Home Mortgage during the crisis. And at that period, this current crisis kind of makes that look like, version 1. But at the time, it was a pretty big deal. It was a big, and we had to move very quickly. We grew from something like 400 to 40,000 people in default, 1 or 2 sites to 11. And money was really no object. It was how fast could you build software to try to deal with this thing. And I had the opportunity to see within Wells Fargo and within our business partners, which were a lot of them, how do you take groups that are used to not moving very fast and don't know much about Agile, because Agile wasn't really very widespread at that time, and transform a variety of different kinds of groups to be more lean and agile. And out of that came my second book, which was about how to transform organizations. And I built some models there of going from kind of a chaotic group to an overstructured group to something somewhere in the middle. And then this last book came out of my period at US Bank. I was hired there in 2011, and I was one of the first people there who had ever done any Agile. It was a very rigid waterfall organization. And what I saw there is, as a rigid waterfall organization starts to adopt Agile techniques, I became dismayed over and over again that people got confused and thought Scrum was Agile. They were the same thing, that Scrum isn't simply a methodology to implement some Agile ideas. And the ease at which people who were used to following a waterfall cookbook would fall into this trap of thinking Agile is a methodology, and you need to follow Scrum, and you need to have user stories, and you need to have coaches and all this stuff, whether it fits or not, was kind of frustrating to me. And so I wanted to write one more book, which became the kind of, I think it's the capstone of my career and my trilogy, talking about the first Agile value, which is people over process, and what does it mean. And so I put a lot of work into that. I have some models I want to share with you, and then I'm going to do some examples, and that's what we're going to talk about. So this is where I'm coming from, and so you can understand where the rest of the material comes from. Okay, Michael, you ready?
Sure.
Michael G has been a partner of mine for several years. He can explain a little bit about it, but we've been through a lot of leadership challenges, and let me have him introduce Blend, which is a great, cool company in himself. Go ahead, Michael.
Hi, thanks for having me, and happy to participate and come along on the journey of this conversation. But so I'm Michael G. I work at a kind of a larger startup now. I think we did a Series F fundraise recently, and we got a $1.7 billion valuation. We've grown considerably over the last few years. I've been there about 3.5 years. When I got there, I think we're about a $300 million company. So we've grown pretty quickly over a short amount of time. And this is actually where I met Michael. We do mortgage software, and we are digitizing a paper-driven process and leveraging as much machine learning and data-driven technology as possible to speed the process up and make a better user experience and a better experience for the lenders as well. And we implemented some pretty cool stuff over at US Bank that was, co-development partnerships with multi-parties. They were very complex projects. Michael really led the charge on making sure that we're following Agile process. And it was really the first time that I had been immersed in Agile process. And if you look at my career, it's not as fancy and explicit as Michael's, but I come from an investment management background. I specialized in trade order management and regulatory compliance for hedge funds and institutional managers. And when I was in that world, everything was very, very much waterfall. We did large project planning exercises. Everything was spreadsheet driven. Everything had a date on it. Everything had a size, an accountable person. I mean, item by item by item. And if one thing changed, you had to redo the entire plan. And so that's, kind of to make fun of the name waterfall down. And so as I started to progress through my career as, thick client to SQL Server applications, we started moving more and more into cloud. And as I got in data integration software, when I started to sell, we were very much starting to move into Agile. but I didn't really have to lead very much in that capacity. I had really structured teams. So when I got into consumer lending at Blend, being a young company, we had to put all the hats back on, and I had to step in and lead a lot of the delivery and govern a lot of the delivery where other companies, we had staff to do that. And, we couldn't go into waterfall because there were so many variables and so many unknowns. And we were building and delivering scope as we went, and we were, really moving fast, and a waterfall design just didn't work. And, we have a lot of Michael's leadership to help guide the entire room, with all the different development teams to really drive into really fast and efficient product development. So that was pretty fun.
So Michael's going to provide color commentary. Many of the examples that I use were inspired by things that we did together and other things. So he'll be someone, so I'm not just lecturing to you the whole time. Okay, so what are we talking about today? So we all know that focusing on people and interactions is more valuable than processes and tools. That's the first value of the Agile Manifesto, and to me, that's the core of it right there. I grew up in areas where you were forced to follow certain methodologies sometimes, even whether they fit or not. And so the idea that you should have flexibility in development has always been important to me. And so I fell in love with that when it first came out, but I think since then, right, here we show a poor gentleman who is looking at all the stuff that's been developed since the manifesto came out, right? All these cool things, they all add value, right? And in the midst of all of this process and all of these tools, how do we actually operationalize the value of people and their interactions? So that's the question I was trying to put into my book and what the answer was. And of course, I don't have the only answer. I'm giving you my perspective. And I'm just hoping that you can find it kind of valuable. So out of all of these ideas of what is human behavior, things like mindsets, which is an interesting idea, culture, behavior, what are people's attitudes, what expectations are we setting? It can be very complicated. So I was looking for some way to express simply what it means and how do we have to behave and how do we have to think in order to maximize the value of people in our work and to maximize the happiness of people in our work and to make people work together as effectively as we can. And I've distilled it into what I call leadership for agility. I was taught this idea many years ago by a brilliant and now dear friend, consultant, who was teaching for what she called facilitative leadership. And facilitative leadership, she mostly taught it about how to manage a meeting. And if you think about a meeting, it's a bunch of people come together, they're trying to solve something, they're trying to get aligned, they're trying to get all their minds together, they're trying to walk out of there with somewhere to go. How do you conduct those meetings in an effective way is an aphorism in a way for leadership in general. If you can learn how to run a good meeting, I think you can learn how to be a good leader, okay? And so that's what this is. I call it leadership for agility. Okay? So the plan for today, I'll talk about the model. I'll talk about some of the implied obligations for organizational leaders. Now, I mean, Agile doesn't really talk about organizational leaders, and Mary Poppendick talked about this last week as well, that organizational leaders matter, right? But what behavior, what do they need to do to make people have value and to have them interact well? Then what I'm gonna do is introduce you to the fictional bank I use in the book. It is not US Bank, it's not Wells Fargo, it's a made up thing. Of course, it has some shared characteristics. And they're going through a digital transformation or agile transformation. And I'll use them to talk about leadership behaviors in a context, right? So it's supposed to help you understand these ideas by seeing them in action. I'll cover meetings in general, and then I'm going to go deep into one particular meeting, which I think is very demonstrative of these leadership principles. It's not something that I've ever seen in any agile methodologies. It's something that some people invented at Wells Fargo many years ago. And it's just a fantastic thing that works really well. So I'm going to use that just to demonstrate these leadership principles. And then depending on how much time we have, it's going to be a choose your own ending. So we'll do another poll after I'm done here. And the topics we can talk about are roles on teams, And I'll give you some previews of that. I mean, I actually think that this role of the chief engineer is the most important missing role in Agile. So I want to talk about that and some other roles. I think the basic Scrum methodologies and SAFe, they very undervalue the importance of expertise in roles. Then we'll talk about team structures if we have time, or if that's what you choose to do. I talk about that a lot in the book as I talk about this. And in this, I'll talk about how teams should be structured and how you think about that, and then a couple of models for that. The responsibility-based planning is something that came out of Lean and out of Toyota, and it's something that we've used a lot at Wells Fargo and at US Bank since then. And the biggest project we did with Michael, we used responsibility-based planning. So rather than standardizing sprints on 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever they might be, you have a more focus on what are called integrating events. And this is great for when you have multiple parties involved who are not following the same methods, right? So you can have someone with a 2-week sprint, someone with a waterfall, someone who has to go through a product council, someone who has to get a lot of feedback through compliance or something. They can all do work in whatever way they want, and this is how we bring it all together. So we keep the teams focused on what they're supposed to do, and then we just focus on the interactions. So it's a generalized way of working that I think is really effective. And then the last option will be talk about problem solving. So an A3 is a form that came out of Toyota as well. It's a lean thing. And I think it's a tool, and I'll talk about this idea of frameworks. It's a framework that brings the trifecta of what I call rigor, alignment, and efficiency, which is to me what we're all about here. Okay. And the goal is at the end that you have some actionable and concrete ideas for honoring people over process. Okay. Questions? Sound good? Let's dive in. So I'll start with the Agile Manifesto. 20 years old now. You know, Jay's gonna run North American as we kind of celebrate and reflect on what we've done. And this is you've all seen this, I'm sure. And the basic idea here is we value this and we value this, but we value this more, right? And so the first one is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And that's what we're talking about today. And we won't really go into these other ones very much, but we're definitely going to focus on this. So this is where it started, this idea that individuals' interactions matter more than processes and tools. But then where are we, right? So if you look at, this is from the SAFe website, and this is the Scaled Agile Framework, which you guys are probably all familiar with. And there's several of these, right? There's this, and there's DAD, and there's Scaled Scrum, or Scrum at Scale. There's a whole bunch of them. They're kind of similar with each other, but the depth in which they lay out a process and the extent to which they're involved with tools, it just demonstrates how our industry has so focused on processes and tools to me, the complete kind of almost ignoring people and interactions. And certainly some of these processes structure interactions in good ways. You know, a Scrum board, I think, is a really nice framework, a really nice tool. But the focus, as I've seen as people go into these things, is they say, how do I do this? What's the rule? As opposed to, here's a bunch of good ideas and good techniques. Let's choose the ones that fit our team best, and let's have our team decide the right ones to use, and let's adjust that over time, as opposed to let's follow that. Okay. So this is a comic that Jay actually gave me, so I thought I would share it here with you. So here's our Agile coach. So how's it going with your SAFe journey? Okay, but I'm a bit confused with the work breakdown hierarchy. Well, it's pretty simple. You got epics, capabilities, features, and stories, but there's different levels and hypotheses, and I think it's too complicated. Well, there's actually a model that presents a really understanding overview. Here it is, and it's complicated, right? And my contention is that the over-specification of methodologies undermines teamwork and thinking, right? And so our job as leaders is to bring that back in, so that the people in our interactions are first, the processes and tools are secondary. So this is the cover of my book. And the idea here is you have a bunch of people around, on a team, and they have all of these methods to choose from. And how do they choose the right method? How do they change their methods over time? How should they be thinking and interacting? And that's what my model is supposed to be. Okay. So into the model. So the model is really effective, really simple. I call it the RAE model. Okay. For rigor, efficiency, and alignment. Those are the three principles that we want to think about as we do our work. It's what we want to teach our organizations to value. It's what we want to teach our people how to behave. It's how we want to think. We use frameworks to help us implement it. And as I mentioned, that I learned this more than 20 years ago, and I've seen this implemented in a dozen or more different organizations, and I've never seen it fail. All I've seen it do is the more people understand this idea and the more they implement it, the better they interact, the more effective they are. So I have great confidence that of all the tools I've seen in 30 or 40 years of software, this very basic idea spreading through an organization is the most powerful thing for success. It's kind of an odd thing. So what do we mean by it? Rigor is the most important thing. Rigor is the idea of you are looking at options to make decisions, that there's transparency around the pros and cons of options, and that it's the most important thing, because without rigor, you can efficiently do the wrong things. You can be aligned around the wrong things. Rigor is what actually enables alignment, because if people need to understand why they're doing what they're doing. Alignment is simply everyone's head is in the game. They're contributing their views and their knowledge to decision making and to activities, and then they are all rowing in the same direction, more or less, because in any development team there can be 100 or more people who are making 1,000 decisions a day, and if they're not generally aligned, they can be going in a wrong way, and there's no way to control that. And then efficiency is a really simple idea here. It's simply respect for people's time. So don't waste my time. So don't burden me with information I don't need, but make sure I have the information I do need. If I need a decision, give me the decision. Don't bring me into meetings where it's not necessary. If you need to talk to me, let's do it efficiently. And so what we're looking for is ways to make these three things happen all the time. And the way that we do that often, besides our own behavior, is frameworks. Okay? And a framework, I think of it as a scaffolding helping teams become rigorous, aligned, and effective. So the ones that we'll talk about, some of these things today, right? Great meetings, I think, is at the core of it, because so much of having people interact together in an effective way happens in meetings and should happen in meetings. And we're so bad at meetings. To me, meetings are the most important process we have in software development. And they're so bad usually. So having great meetings is the most important framework. There's lots of other ones, the Scrum board, the A3 that came out of Lean. The way you structure teams and roles, I think, is an important framework. One that I learned about after I wrote the book actually was the Amazon memo, which some of you might be familiar with. It's this idea that if you go into a meeting on Amazon that's about something important, you have to have a 3 to 6 page memo that's written in advance by the team and distributed first. You go into the meeting and people read the memo before you start talking, right? It's a cultural thing that makes them have more rigorous discussions, more rigor. It makes them be more efficient because you're not wasting time, and it helps with their alignment. It's a great framework. Integrating events, which we'll talk about if we do the responsibility-based planning, and even things like lean tools, right? Things like 2x2 matrices, etc. And the scary thing is that people in their heads only have room for so many frameworks. Okay? You can't absorb every framework in the world. So organizations need to have some small number of these things that are cultural. So that's the basic model. And we're all through today's discussion, we want to think about how as leaders, and I don't mean just organizational leaders, I mean people at every level of the team, people at every level of the organization who are involved in this, we all have this obligation to behave in this way. And I want to show you what that means. This page is about the special obligations of organizational leaders. And I've given a couple of talks on this that are just about this. I could talk about this for hours, but I won't. So the Agile Manifesto, as Mary Poppendick and Tom said last week, is actually actively hostile to organizational leaders, right? The assumption is that organizational leaders just get in the way. And there's principles in the Agile Manifesto, things like the best architectures and ideas come from self-organizing teams. Management's responsibility is to provide the tools and the something and then get out of the way, etc. And I think that's fundamentally wrong, right? Okay, so what is the obligations of organizational leaders? And if we think about our job as organizational leaders is to bring rigor, to bring alignment, to bring efficiency, to help our organization adopt these leadership principles, what do we have to do? Okay, so if I start over here in rigor, because I want to, this is the most important one. This is about making good decisions. So we have to make sure that where we have an important decision to make, or we have a team that needs to execute on something important, that it has the right talent and the right experience, the right skills, the right roles. So if as a leader we say, oh, we're going to do Scrum and self-organizing teams, and we don't have any specific roles, and except for Scrum Master and Product Owner, right? And you say, hey, go do your thing. Okay, that could work, right? But maybe not. Maybe you don't have the right talent. Maybe you don't have the right people. Maybe you don't have the right experience. And then we have to make sure the team has the right composition, right? And we have to make sure that options are considered. And this is a behavioral thing and a teaching thing. So if someone comes to me, which there's an example in the book where someone had figured something out and came to the team leader and said, this is what we should do, but there were no options. The team leader rightly said, well, what else could we do? How do I evaluate your recommendation if I don't know what the options are? You have no, so basically that idea that you have to kind of curate and make that cultural, that we have options and that they're visible and that the team can understand why we decide things and that there's evidence for your decisions. Then on the alignment side, it's about getting everyone's head in the game and moving together. And here's things like the right involvement. So in mortgage, compliance is an important thing. So if you're going to want to move fast on a compliance sensitive thing, you have to make sure the compliance department is effectively on board, right? So as a manager, you have to reach out to their manager and make sure it's a whole deal and they're involved. That's a thing we have to do for our teams. It's hard for our teams to do that for themselves. And that there's the information they need is available, that we enable all their input, that we value consensus, and consensus is an important and difficult thing. But the other thing is, and this is something I see way too often on teams, is there has to be someone to decide when the team is stuck. Okay. And that's an obligation of organizational leaders. And I can give a simple example of that. We were trying to decide about whether to do home equity on Blend or not, which Michael might remember. And there was a bunch of different options of the ways you could go about it. And the team couldn't decide, right? Because there was considerations that were well beyond the team's knowledge or ability. So the team was able to put together some of the options, bring it to senior manager, and senior manager could decide, bang. Now the team isn't able to go do that, right? And that's really important, that teams have someone to decide and they can figure out who can help them make decisions. And then the last thing I'll talk about here is the efficiency dimension. I'm going to skip the first one because I have a whole slide on that. That's really an important thing. But what frameworks are we going to use? Are we going to teach people to do A3s? Are we going to do the Amazon memo? Are we going to make people stop and read the Amazon memo? Are we going to implement SAFe and say everyone has to follow SAFe? Right? That setting that frameworks for your organization is really critical. Making sure that meetings are good. So if you go into a meeting and it's not good, stop it and walk out. And then having the tools and techniques. So if you need Jira, if you need a polling system, whatever you might need, you have to get some number of those. And I'm not going to talk much about it here, but My counsel is always avoid over standardization. Right? So the cost of more than one tool, who cares, right? And sometimes it's even better that people don't have to use the same tools. Okay.
Michael,
Yeah.
those concepts, these are fundamental to the way that we run our account management business at Blend as well. And we take some of the learnings from software delivery, and then we bring them into just the account management structure, because these are really good fundamentals to accomplish really complicated things. And so when we start to look, and this is a way of thinking, this is a way of being, this is kind of a way of life, to be honest. And it takes time to train your staff into this way of thinking. But as people get trained into, open and really wide breadth of thought, it just becomes normal and natural. And the less the leaders have to be there to guide and to coach and to
Absolutely.
mentor it. And so as we go in, we find the right talent. And, I've recently been really studying, specialization versus generalization. And the stronger generalist that you have, the faster this kind of wide agile idea starts to embrace, because they have the experience across functions. They know how to do many things, and they can think widely about the impacts on other groups, other departments, other people, other actions. And so that's where the team composition and the right talent really come into rigor. And as you train these thought processes, and it's not a functional process, it's thought. You think about things a certain way, and you start to ask the right questions, and then you can start to predict the potential outcomes, and then categorize and prioritize the outcomes that you want. And so that's where the options start to get considered. So these things really roll together as you start to train, and you really embed this like thought process and this way of being into the teams. And again, with the frameworks, I can't agree more about framework. Is, if you can come in with the appropriate framework that works for the team, and you get a consensus decision on how you guys want to operate, and then you start to talk about your goals that you're driving to, and then the path to the goals often shapes itself out without over processizing or processizing. I just invented a word, but over standardizing, because when you start to do that, that's when gaps start to fill and cracks start to open, because people start to not think widely and they follow the checklist. And we all know checklists don't work.
Yeah. I mean, something comes to mind as an example here on this one. So our team, this is a joint team that Michael's and my groups were working on with a couple other companies. Oops, sorry. Had adopted responsibility-based planning, okay, after it wasn't going very well. And an agile coach was given to the team, and the agile coach came in and thought we were doing everything wrong. So he started putting back up the scrum boards and the 2-week sprints and that kind of thing, and trying to get to user stories. And the team didn't want to do that, right? But they wanted to be compliant with what the company was telling them they should do. So this poor agile coach comes in and starts doing that, and the team would kind of let him go put his stuff up and kind of ignore him the whole time, right? And he never really asked, right? He didn't enable input. He didn't value their consensus. He said, my job is to teach this process. You guys are doing it wrong. And they were like way ahead of him, right? They were all had way more experience than him, and had more sophisticated, and had put this thing together, but he didn't really listen. He didn't value consensus. He didn't enable input. He didn't enable rigor around the right way they were doing it, et cetera, right? And that kind of thing I see over and over and over. So, okay, thank you, Michael. So this is one of the most important ideas in all of my books. And we talk about 2 different kinds of processes, and it's really up to leadership. And I don't just mean organizational leadership. I mean leadership at every level, to understand these 2 things, understand the balance, and understand that it changes all the time. Okay, so there's a field of knowledge called process control, and there's 2 fundamental different methods of it. One is predictive process control, and one is adaptive process control. And I think the whole agile movement was this idea that we've been trying to do this, right? And things like, the Carnegie Mellon approach to standardization, the waterfall approaches with highly specified methodologies, trying to get to the point where not all projects fail, right? By putting more and more controls and steps in there, right? This idea of plan the work, work the plan, right, Michael? So that's what this is. And that works where you're doing repetitive, predictable things that are stable and there's an execution focus. So I can plan at the beginning, I can follow the plan, I can adjust the plan based upon minor variations. And then there's what I've done most of my career, which is new product development kinds of things. So this uses adaptive process control, where the focus is not on standardizing, measure, and continuous improvement. It's on building knowledge, enabling expertise, and experimenting and adjusting. And these are situations where new product development, where you have a challenge you haven't met before. Oftentimes you're dealing with technology you haven't worked with before. Certainly people or companies you haven't worked with before. And there's a lot of new things. So an example is one of the things Michael's blend worked with us on was doing instant loan approvals, right? And so we had Fannie Mae, WePro, Blend, US Bank, several different departments, Wolters Kluwer, which is doing the document generation and imaging. All these companies had never worked together before, right? We were doing something that had never been done before, which was instantly approving a loan based upon the deposits in your checking account. No one had ever done that before. We had a lot of new things. So here the focus is on that. But over time, as we get into the fourth release of that product, we're going to be more like this, right? So even for something that's brand new, over time, it becomes more like this, right? And if you think about some things like, let's take bug fixing in a stable system, it's going to be very like this. And this is where we do things like Kanban, right? Okay. But anything brand new is going to be like here. Okay. And so implementing standardized processes, forcing people to use standard tools, forcing people on what the sprint level is, or even that you're doing sprints, in this case, gets in the way often, right? Because forcing people to do things that's not in their wheelhouse, or they don't want to do, or doesn't build knowledge, right, is difficult and dangerous. But if you're doing this and you're not standardizing on a mechanism, and you can't continuously improve, and you're going to fail. This balance is at the heart of Agile leadership, I think.
I also find that this adaptive process control works when you do program development for like non-software. So as you get into your teams and you have, new charters or new requirements of your team that you need to build a program for, in the old world, people would try to overdraft and get to a final state before they shared anything. And if you start with the outline and a framework, and often if your team doesn't know how to do this, you start the outline and the framework, and then you share it, and you start to get the collaboration going, and you openly say, I don't know, I need your help. Can you help me with this, or can you help me with that? What's your idea here, here, and here? And then you get to a final state significantly faster than if you write it by yourself in a box with closed doors and no windows. Then you release it and you realize that 80% of it's wrong, and you got to go rewrite the whole thing.
Yeah.
So these things really apply across organizational process as well as on the development side too. So these things are really, really fast.
Okay, let's go to the next one. So I now want to just make sure people are paying attention. So we're going to do the next poll. So what I want to do here is ask you your current work assignment and how you would characterize it. So, A is it's repetitive and we work hard to standardize and improve it. B is it's repetitive, but we don't standardize much. Not really a great situation. C is it's repetitive and creative. D is it's primarily creative, but we have a bunch of standards that get in our way, at least sometimes. And E is it's primarily creative and we have enough freedom to work in the best ways that we want to. To see how many people are answering this. We'll give it one more minute. Okay, so early returns, it looks like D is the most popular answer. So primarily creative, and I think that would reflect, why we come to these kind of meetings, right? But we're subject to some standards that at least occasionally hinder us. I think a lot of organizations don't really understand the creative process all that well. And especially in bigger companies, they want to standardize things. And there's no, in my mind, there's usually no reason to do that. But there's some idea that, if someone's using Jira and someone using DevOps, Azure DevOps, that we're going to have conflicts, or we can't work together if we're not all on the same tool, or everyone has to be on a 2-week sprint cycle, even though the products don't ever interact except through APIs, right? So we can get kind of carried away with standardization in ways that are not good for us, right? And I think this group doesn't really have much in here, which is great. Okay, let's keep going. So I'm gonna turn to the case study, the fictional case study from the book. And again, I'm doing this to demonstrate RAE leadership. Here's a good question. So what about process consistency for one product with many teams? That's from Doug. That's really necessary. So that's a really great question, and it makes sense. So if you have one product and you have many teams and you're all in the same release cycle, and there's a lot of interaction between the teams, then of course you have to have the appropriate amount of consistency. So an example for me was this company called Encino, which I've done a lot of work with, that when I was working with them, they were doing 2 releases a year as a product. It's a very complicated product. And they had like 17 different sprint teams all contributing to the same release, right? And in that case, the commonality of approach and tools was very important, right? But at US Bank, if I'm doing something in mortgage and someone's doing something in credit card and we never work together, who cares, right? Any constraint on me because of what they're doing is a negative, and vice versa. Okay. So I think that gets to the core question of leadership is, when should you have process consistency and when shouldn't you have process consistency? It's about those leadership principles. Why does it help? Why does it hurt, etc. Okay. Doug, you want to say anything?
Thank you. That's what I was imagining you'd say, but I just wanted confirmation.
Okay, it was a test.
No, it wasn't a test. It was you were just emphasizing. You spoke a lot about people over individuals and interactions over processes, and I was just wondering what happens when you have a larger product.
Yeah, processes and tools, I do come back to this because sometimes people misinterpret what I'm saying, that processes and tools aren't important. They're really important, right? And they're very valuable. And I'm a big supporter of them, right? And so we don't want to undervalue those where it's very important, right? We just want to have the right ones. And that's where thinking and leadership come into play, of choosing the right ones for the right situations. Okay,
that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so here's the bank. They're called Pacifica. They're in San Diego because I always wanted to live in San Diego, and was born in Duluth, Minnesota by accident. So the bank, it's a kind of a traditional bank. They're big in trade finance. They're in California and in Asia. And they're being hurt by companies like Blend, right? So not Blend in particular, but nimble, well-financed people trying to fill needs that really weren't easy to fill until we had ubiquitous devices and big data and infinite processing, all the things that we've grown to love and they're all dealing with now. Right? The bank decides that they need to be more nimble, and so they undertake a digital transformation, right? So I won't get into the idea of how good it is to do a digital transformation or not, but they do, right? And so what do they do? So the first thing they do is find a business line to go first. So in their case, they found a business line and got their foreign exchange or trade finance business. And they have a good leader, kind of a younger, ambitious, semi-tech savvy leader. And they say, well, let's do something digital and agile in this business line. Good idea. The next thing they find is a talented, experienced product manager. So obviously, if they're going to do something, the question is, what are we going to do and how is it going to make money for us? So they found someone who had the right experience and had been in sales, had done some product management, had some technology experience, they had leadership skills, etc. So good so far. Then they found a value to deliver. So what is the value that they find that they think they can do now that they have these digital tools? And the one that they choose is hedging services for small firms. So this is foreign currency exchange. And traditionally, it's done by big companies who've got a lot of money because hedging is not cheap, right? It's kind of hard to figure out. It's kind of expensive. It's not worth doing unless you had a lot at stake. But now, with all these cool new tools we have, with artificial intelligence and the web, et cetera, Pacifica Bank thinks they can deliver a product that can help people hedge even much smaller amounts. So it seemed like a good idea. They hired some consultants. In this case, they hired a national consulting firm, kind of like a Deloitte or a Matrix or something like that. They bought some tools. They built a great space. So I just found this Agile space on the net and changed it to be for Pacifica. They got the core team together, all good. Then the Agile coach, who was the consultant, said, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to build out our backlog. And so they started jamming things into Jira. We need to get kind of a rough technical architecture, kind of what you would do in a sprint zero. And they're ready to go, right? So all's looking good, very excited. The team's juiced up and they're raring to go. And then they get a little stuck, right? And so the coach is saying, well, how do we get to that next point? What's our plan? How do we know if we're going to deliver on time? What's it going to cost to deliver, etc.? And the coach says, well, let's do planning poker and we'll assign some story points and then we'll allocate the backlog to the sprints by priority and we'll be good, right? But the team doesn't get it, right? So there's a little bit of a rebellion on the team. And the senior managers here that the team's a little stuck and they're trying to figure out how to get unstuck. So they wind up bringing in the hero of the book. Her name is Mary, and Mary's like a very experienced, smart person, of course, because she needs to kind of be the smart person because she's teaching in the book. And she works with the team and works with the Agile coach and helps them understand why they're stuck, right? And there's several reasons. So one is the architecture isn't at design level, right? And that's on purpose in a lot of Agile implementations where we may not flesh out the architecture to every piece. And if you think about the architecture, in my mind, the architecture is what's every component we're going to use? How are they all connected to each other? What is each of them going to do? What changes do I have to make to each of these components in order to have my first product delivery? Okay. And I mean, Agile really doesn't have a method for that I've seen. Scrum doesn't anyhow. And so they didn't have that. And the Agile coach is saying, we don't need all that. We'll work that out as we get further along. And the team's used to having it. They don't know how to estimate. They don't know how to bring the other teams that are kind of in the periphery into the loop of what do they have to do when, because not everyone is at the beck and call of this small team. They're dependent upon lots of other people, and there's no way that they could figure out how to do estimates based upon that methodology. And without detailed estimates and designs, which they were used to doing in the past, right, they couldn't understand how they commit to a delivery date. And the business line likes, Agile, but on the other hand, they want to know, are we going live in November or are we going live in May? right? And they couldn't tell them. Another thing that they found confusing was that the way the Scrum approach is that a user story is the unit of development. And it's a great idea in many cases, right? Because we're going to take a user story, we're going to develop it, we're going to test it in the sprint, and it's going to be done. The next sprint, we'll go do some more user stories, right? But in this case, right, any particular user story might have 4 or 5 different systems involved, right? So if they say, we're going to put this particular user story in sprint 2, well, geez, that includes these guys and these guys and these guys. How do I get them all lined up? They're not all doing 2-week sprints. They're not doing, some of them aren't doing Agile at all. And some of them have other requirements, right? So they couldn't figure out how this approach of allocating, backlog items to sprints could really help them. And the other thing was their key vendor partner wasn't included in the planning. Right? They were treated as an external thing, and they didn't have enough information to know what they were going to do. Now, none of this, I mean, to be a criticism of Scrum or sprints or SAFe or anything like that, right? I had to create a situation where that needed some leadership to work out. Okay, so don't take it as insulting if you think that maybe they're Scrum or they're just doing it wrong. That's probably true, okay, but not really relevant for what we're talking about today. Okay, so they had to figure out how to get unstuck, right? And so oftentimes, if you need to get unstuck, right, you want to return to your foundational leadership principles, right? And that's what happened here, right? The team just didn't have the expertise to take them where they needed to go, right? So they had an Agile coach who was relatively unsophisticated, who was pretty much focused on simple Scrum teaching, right? And it wasn't the right fit for the team. They needed something else. So organizational leadership, right? Collaborating with the CIO and the consultant, bring someone who has more experience in to help the team, right? Fundamentally, when you look at a team that's stuck, so many times we say, what's the problem? A lot of times we don't go to people, right? And we just need to go there faster, I think. Obviously, bringing the key partner in and asking them to join the team to help them design the solution. This is often not done, and it's sad, okay? And I'll ask Michael to talk about this a little bit. But what happens here is that sometimes we go, okay, so we know that this particular vendor is going to be important to us in this, but we don't know exactly how much it is, right? We don't know what we're going to want to pay them or not, right? How do we get them to participate on our team and be a team member aimed at the solution, as opposed to just being there for what they need to get out of it, right? Or for their own purposes. And I think that this lack of partnership, and it's one of the Agile principles, right, or values, which is collaboration over contracts, also gets missed a lot. I don't know, Michael, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because, earlier in my career, I'd never worked at a company where, we were always viewed as a partner. We served a function, we were typically a vendor, we sold a piece of software that did a thing. And when I got to Blend, and Blend had this cliche, we're trying to transform an industry just like every other startup in California has. But we were starting to really start to get into these ideas that could. And this project that Michael's talking about, where we did the instant approval on your retail account, like we started to transform because that had never been done before. And US Bank was really great at bringing us in as a partner. And, we were invited to become part of the design. And it was like, to Michael's point earlier, it wasn't a Blend and US Bank event. It was a Blend, a Fannie, a US Bank, a Wipro. It was like this crazy project where we had all these different people coming together in partnership to build something. And we were able to bring in our product teams, our engineers. We put full-time dedicated delivery staff to do project management and triage and implementation and testing. And we really became embedded, and we basically set up shop in St. Louis. Like we just moved. I was there for 3 weeks of the month for, I don't even know how long. And we just got a lot done because we sat in the same room. We were a team. It was a pretty unique experience that we were able to become a partner, and we weren't treated as a vendor. We became part of a team. So it was pretty neat. And this has actually become our North Star with every interaction with every client, is that we get to become a partner in all of the development versus just being a vendor providing a simple solution.
And it's really a core thing of lean product development. I mean, Toyota is always well known for their partnerships with their vendors. So I think it comes out of lean. It also is in the Agile Manifesto, and I think it's a really important thing. And then the question is, where do we go from here? So the consultant schedule helps structure, okay, what we're going to talk about next, which is the business process technical architecture simulation. That's a bit of a mouthful, okay, but it's a particular kind of a meeting in this kind of a situation. So we'll get there in a moment. But first, I just want to talk about meetings in general. So I talked earlier that I thought the single most important process for software development is meetings. Okay, and most people will say, Michael, you're a lunatic. We have too many meetings. And I say, yeah, you have too many bad meetings, right? Okay, and you know, it's hard for me to, I mean, if I think about the meetings I've had over my career, I'd say 90+ % are not good meetings. Okay, and I'm well known for my big meetings that are really well structured. And I'm also well known for liking meetings to plan meetings, right? It's almost like a joke, right? But I think it's a joke on other people for not doing that. So just some things about meetings, right? And you guys have probably seen most of this before, but you know, I've seen this observed more in the breach than in reality. So have an objective, right? So, you know, we've taught people that if you go into a meeting and there's no objective, just leave. Okay. So how can you help make meetings better by just not accepting bad ones? Laying out a visible and active path to achieve. So what's going to happen in the meeting? Who's going to do what? What are the roles and responsibilities in the meeting? Then I think the physical environment is so important. And this is pre-COVID, obviously, and hopefully we'll get back to it again someday. But setting up the room appropriately, or today getting the online tools effective, right, is really important. And this is often missed. So, you know, think about meetings where you've been, where you're an important participant and you're going to the meeting and you don't know what's going to happen in the meeting. And you're not really agreed that you're going to really make a decision in the meeting, and you're a decision maker, right? So this idea that as people go into the meeting, they know how the meeting is going to work, they understand what it is, and the key people are aligned about what we're trying to accomplish. In the meeting itself, we want to make the path visible and start down it. So every meeting in the book has an agenda up on the wall, and we put check marks on where we are in the meeting. You control the flow of the meeting. You have activities as opposed to agenda items, and we'll talk through those. Then you conduct the activities. Okay, you want to have others do the work. So you don't, the worst kind of a meeting is to have a facilitator up in front of it with a flip chart writing things down. The only thing worse than that is the facilitator having a Word document or a spreadsheet, typing stuff in and projecting it, right? Those are killers, right? Those are bad meetings. And then you got to deal with disruptions. And so if the meeting's going badly, take a time out, bring some people together and reset. And then when you conclude, make sure you're aligned on the answer, agree on who's going to tell who what happened, right? So what is now public and how are we going to make that public, and then set next steps. So, I mean, I think there's nothing new for most of you. It's about actually doing it, right? And doing it well, and then selecting the right way to make a path in a meeting from the beginning to the end with a set of activities, right, that other people are doing in a way that gets you rigor, alignment, and efficiency. Okay. And I think that if you know how to do this, you can manage a group, you can manage an organization, because what do you want out of your leadership team? You want agreement on objectives, you want rigorous decision-making, you want efficiency, and you want alignment, right? And some of the same techniques apply. Okay, next slide. But, okay, does that mean you have a lot more meetings? I don't think it does, right? I think it means you have a lot better meetings. You might have some longer meetings. But if a meeting isn't the best way to get rigor, alignment, efficiency, use something else. Okay, so there's an example in the book. They've added a reliability engineer to the team, and the reliability engineer wants to do a failure mode and effects analysis. So FMEA is one of my favorite tools, actually. I really love it. It's a standard engineering thing for those of you who are engineers. And basically what it does is it lays out every piece in the solution, how every piece can fail, what happens when that piece fails, how you know it fails, and then how do you repair it, right? So it's about getting 100% reliability on everything. And the engineer wanted to get everyone together in a meeting and just go through each department and each piece that's involved and have them say what it is while he wrote it all down. And his manager, of course, says, no way. That is completely, it's not respecting their time. It's not efficient. Don't do that. Just go to each one, get what you need, put it together. And then if they need to work together on it, that's fine. But don't just serially run through it. Okay. So knowing when not to have meetings is as important as having great meetings. Okay, so let's go to this particular meeting where I'm going to do a little bit deeper dive into. I think there's two things to take away from this discussion. One is, how does this demonstrate rigor, alignment, and efficiency, right? And so it's just an example of a good way of doing it, of doing something. And it fits this particular problem that we posed for Pacifica Bank. It fits a lot of other problems as well. So the actual idea of doing this kind of a thing can be useful in itself. Okay, so not just a leadership thing, a kind of meeting which is valuable. So this is actually invented by a team at Wells Fargo, maybe 15 to 18 years ago, before Agile was invented for sure. And it came out of the ideas of Lean. Okay, so out of Lean came ideas like visual management, go see, and it also came out of the training that we had in this leadership methodology, right, of rigor, alignment, and efficiency. And it has proven successful over and over and over again. And after I describe it to you, I'll have Michael describe that the way we kicked it off at U.S. Bank with Blend and Fannie Mae and WePro. It became the famous Marriott meeting. Anyhow, so but it's worked over and over again, and it works if you do it well. It even works if it's done badly. I mean, it's kind of amazing. So let's talk about what it is. So the objective, right, is to gain broad understanding and alignment among our team members on several foundational things. So think about where Pacifica was. They needed more information about who does what, how this all fits together to really lay out a plan that made sense for them. So we want to know what business processes we're going to do, right? Starting with our customers, ending with provision of value. And it's not just that the product owner needs that or the sales department needs that. We all want to have that at the level at which we need it so that we can do our jobs more effectively. Then we want the technology architecture that will support this, including each component, what they do and what changes are needed. We want a high fidelity between these two things. Now, I've seen lots of cases where people do this in a project on their own and they draw all kinds of charts of what the business process is. I've seen all kinds of places where technology architects and engineers do this and they have details of system interaction diagrams and stuff that business people can't understand. This is what gets missed, is that the business process and the technologies are unified, right? That they support each other and we all understand it, right? That the business people, I hate using that term, but they understand the technology and the technology people understand the business processes enough that it fits together and we have a good plan. And then this is not to be underestimated, which is building relationships among a broad array of your team members and leaders, right? So that your developer who's doing something that's a little specialized and they need to talk to someone in compliance, now they know who the compliance person is because they had a chance to interact around something like this. Okay, so this is what we're trying to accomplish. And if we can accomplish this and we can do this well, we can do it early in the project, or we can do it several times throughout the project to check and to get more detail and do error modes and etc. Right? This can be the core mechanism for creating effective leadership. Okay, so this is, I just threw this in here. So this is the Wells Fargo team that used it the most. It was the electronic loan file team. And we wound up, we had a very complicated system that we were building. So we had a new origination system. We had a new document generation system. We were doing e-closing. Every loan was going to be e-closed. This is 2007, 2006, so it's early. No one had ever done any of this stuff before. We were doing imaging of everything that hadn't been distributed into the field. It was a lot of change in business process, a lot of change in technology. It was multiple business units at Wells Fargo coming together to collaborate with Fannie Mae and First American, and there was probably 5 or 6 important vendors in it. And we started doing the business process technology simulation before we even knew what the pieces were going to be. And we wound up doing it every month when we got together for about 1.5 years. And it grew to have, we would let as many people who wanted to come to these meetings to see this come, and we would have 200 people come. We didn't care if you wanted to come see it, right? It's part planning, part learning, part demonstrating. And we figured the more people who wanted to understand what this was about, the better. And it was extraordinarily successful. And we gave everyone who come to one of our meetings a hat. So, I don't know if anyone else is on the call who was at any of these, but Michael, do you want to maybe just describe how this worked at the Marriott meeting?
Yeah, sure. So we, we had this idea that we wanted to create, a single source of validation for, income, assets, employment. And we know that Fannie Mae was the primary government agency that was going to be the engine that did the approvals. And so we had a base premise of, what were the main dependencies for these approvals or these instant approvals to happen. And each different group, so Blend had a component, or Blend had a role, Fannie Mae had a role, Wipro had a role, US Bank had a role. And so everybody was prepared to talk about like what their primary function or primary dependency was. And everybody got a chance to demo or talk through, the technology, or go through, what their secret sauce was. And, it was very nicely prepared with people that had the right content to talk about the right things. And then as they were talking, other people within the group, and I mean, there were 80, 90 people there from all different walks of life. We had business development, we had product management, we had engineers, we had.
And what I'd say there is that, we talk about agile teams should be no more than 10 people. Well, you can't do much with that, right? How do you deal with it if you need 100 people, right? So.
Yeah. And what the great thing was, is while people were talking, people had the freedom to raise their hand and say, well, what about this? What about this? And we started to talk more and more about what the different interdependencies and how close knitted we had to be. And what this did was it drove collaboration and created velocity. We probably got a lot more done in that one large meeting, when we probably thought we wouldn't get much done with that many people, to really create some velocity to get a lot of stuff done faster, because we started to understand what each different group that was there was representing, and what critical role that they played, and what critical role their functions played. So it's pretty neat to see, the genesis of the idea come together in one big meeting. It could have been a mess with 80 people there, where we just talked in circles and nothing was actually done. So the preparation going into that, and the preparation and direction of each team that was coming in, was pretty important. To Michael's point earlier, prep, the meeting before the meeting was probably.
And I'm going to show you how to do that for this particular meeting, and that's me. So let's see how do you clear that. Be a way to clear drawings. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about physical room setup. This is from the before times, so we can now kind of remember what it used to be like when we could actually have meetings in person. And again, I think this is so important. I mean, so many meetings, you go in and the room is set up in a U shape, right? And that's like just crippling for conversation. So what we want to do is we want to set up the room to get the action that we want. And for this, we really want to have a big wall. And I'll go on the next slide, I'll talk about what's on this wall, or in front of this wall. And then we want to have people, you want to get rid of all the tables so that it's not in the way, because you want to be able to have people come up from anywhere and help, right? So if someone thinks I need to add a sticky here for the way that this system interacts to the other one, instead of saying, okay, what is it, and writing it down, we'll say, could you please write up one of these interaction cards and stick it on the wall, right? And I think that those of you who are, you know, in Scrum meetings or in product increment meetings and those kinds of things, you know, I think you guys will all have a sense for how important this kind of arrangement is, right? And so different kinds of meetings need different kinds of arrangements, and this is a leadership thing about how do we get the team to interact effectively. Physical arrangement matters, right? And we see that in ideas like, oh, let's have everyone just sit in a studio with no desks. Well, what does the team think, right? I mean, so many cases the senior executives say, oh, let's just have an open studio, and the teams are going, I can't work in an open studio. I'm happy to work in an open studio for a while, but I don't work well in noise, right? And so it's really about listening to your team and getting the right physical infrastructures in place. So, okay, so here's the architecture simulation. So there's two critical things that we're going to do to prepare. We're going to have the architecture, right, which is, I need to get a different pointer here, just a moment. We're going to have the architecture, and we're going to have business scenarios, okay? And we're going to have that prepared in advance, and we're going to have it highly visible and physical, right? People do not interact well with anything projected. People do not interact with anything printed out. People react much better if this is a 8.5, 11 sheet of paper and this is masking tape, okay? It's bigger, it's changeable, it's physical, it's human, okay? And so that's a really big deal in leadership if you want to have people interact effectively, is to make it accessible. And so many times we don't do that. I mean, I remember at this big failed project at Wells Fargo, when, you know, the architecture is put together in an architecture document according to the methodology by the lead architect. It's a 80-page Word document, and at the review meeting, he's paging through his diagrams, right? No one understood what the hell it was. He got no input. No business person could understand it. And then across the room, across the building, we're doing this where the whole team understands what's going on, right? So you can see big failure, big success happens through better leadership. And it's not my leadership here. This is the team doing this. So in this particular case, right, they put this up on the wall. And up on the wall, and it's again, paper, masking tape, etc. They actually put little sheets, cards on each of these lines saying, what is that connection? Rather than just saying it's a connection. And in this case, I drew a fairly simple architecture. So we have the customer's accounting system. In this case, could be someone in China or someone in Japan, someone in California. They have an accounting system with their transactions in it that they can upload, or they can just fill out a form, okay, and then upload that or enter it on the going through the web system. Okay, so there's a department at Pacifica that runs their web system, and that's the pacificabank.com group. There's an integration bus that's used for a lot of things at Pacifica. They may be used here. It may not be used here. That's really not decided. There's the hedging management system, which is an old mainframe thing that they're going to use, and that they got to figure out how it has to change or not. And then they decided that the core of the system they're going to build in the public cloud. I mean, they're going to be agile, they're going to be modern, they're going to be digital, so they're going to be cloud. So they've chosen to use one of the clouds. I don't specify which one. And then the core team, right, is really focused around this, okay, the new team. Okay. And so this is up on the wall by, put up by their engineers. You can do it in a number of different ways. I talk about some of them in the book, but you can also make up how you want to do it. The first time I actually saw this done, each of these systems was actually a human being standing at a podium. Behind them, they had a big sheet for database entries. The integration bus was actually played by a woman who dressed up like a bus. She actually made a costume like a school bus, and that she was physically driving around messages. So if a messages went from here to here, she would grab a piece of paper from here and carry it over to here. Right now, people in the audience can see this and they can understand what it is, and they can engage with it in a productive way. They can bring up all kinds of things that can go wrong or ideas to make it better that they can't do if it's a pre-cooked architecture diagram in Visio. Okay. And then the scenarios is the other important part, which is what are the transactions we're going to run through this thing. So typically this would be done by product management, product owners, systems analysts, user experience, whoever can put it together, right? And these would tend to be put together in advance. You might have physical things to demonstrate parts of it, so it's more visible and more understandable. And you're ready to do. And the basic idea is you explain to everyone there, and it can be a lot of people, right? Everyone who needs to know this should be there. So, you know, I've had 200 people at one of these. I got a lot of crap for that. But, you know, typically you're going to have, I don't know, 30, 40 people if you're doing a small project, at least the kinds that I do, up to 100 or so. And at various stages, who needs to know what you're doing and when is it ready to be seen? That's all important. So in this case, we have the scenario. We start running the scenario through. We've explained the architecture. Everyone's asked their questions. They get how they interact. Then we start with the scenario. So in this case, we say, okay, I am a personal customer in Japan. I'm going to receive, you know, $100,000 as an inheritance in 3 months from now, right? I'm kind of worried about how currency fluctuations go. I'd like to hedge that, right? Or I'm a business customer in California. I'm selling to China. I get yen back. I'm worried about that too, right? So pretty simple things, but then we pretend we're actually the person of that customer, right? So we say, okay, is this in my accounting system? No, I don't have an accounting system. This is simpler. I'm going to just put in the transaction. I sign into pacificabank.com. What if I'm a prospect? I don't have an ID or password. When do I have to get an ID or password? Okay, now I've put in my transaction. Okay, I've signed in here. What's actually going to take the transaction? Is it software that these guys are going to build? Or are they going to just do the authentication and they're going to hand off to this group that's going to build it? Who's doing that work? Well, we don't know yet. So we start having this discussion about who has to do which piece of work, right? Is Pacifica Bank, is the .com going to go directly to my hedge, or are we going to go through the integration bus, right? What changes does the actual hedge system have to do? Is it going to store the information about the customer or just store the information about the hedge it's trying to do, right? So as you walk through this, all of these technical questions become exposed. Everyone there has a chance to understand what the questions you're trying to answer that are both business process oriented and technology oriented. Everyone who owns a component can say, okay, I think I know what I want to do. You can have the discussion about, do I go direct or do I go through here and why, with people from here, 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 and any implications from business process it might have, right? It's a richer discussion. It's more rigorous. It's more efficient than most ways I've seen this done, okay? And we really want to focus on the audience doing the work, right? We want to make it physical. We want people to get up and walk around. That's why we don't have tables there. That's why we don't have paper. That's why we're not projecting. And we want to have a good time, okay? And I don't mean it's going to be like a party having fun, right? But people have fun at these because they're challenging and interesting, right? And they're working together and people like to work together. So these are typically pretty fun things. Okay, Michael, you want to add anything else? Mr. G?
Sorry. No, I think just to reiterate, you know, the getting the architecture on the board, and we did this a lot at US Bank, you know, not just in that Marriott meeting, but this became a pretty regular exercise for us where whenever we needed to do, you know, planning for the next major phase or any kind of new project that was coming up, we get all the major players and all the dependent players in a room, and we'd go through the same exercise over and over again. And it really created it led into like what our roadmaps were, and ultimately into like what the project definitions were going to be, and helped organize us and create a lot of velocity. It's pretty neat.
And I really want to emphasize this idea here, right? So as team members, as organizational leaders, right, this is what we're aiming for, right? And how do we get that? In this case, it's this kind of a meeting. In other cases, it's something else. In many cases, it might be something straight out of the methodology. But this is the thought process. Okay, so let's go on. So now out of that meeting came many things in the book, 3 big things. One is this idea is they're missing some roles. And the reason they're missing some roles is because they realize now that they have all these 4 or 5 or 6 different parties who all have to make changes to the architectural elements that we've talked about. And they can't all just be in the same tool with user stories. They can't all be on 2-week sprints. So now we need some other things. So we actually kind of need a project manager, right? A technical project manager, God forbid, but we do, right? We actually need a few more systems analysts. We need a test leader, because we're going to bring these groups together with their changes periodically in what we call integrating events, which I'll talk about here. Right? And we have to make sure that as we enter that, we have our test plan, we have the test data created, we have the test environments ready to go. Right? As we find defects, who has to fix which defect when, we kind of need a test manager. Right? So there's some roles that are not specified in simple Scrum that the team thinks are important. And part of it is they're used to some of those roles. Part of it, those roles are really valuable sometimes. Another thing that came out of the meeting was we need to improve our connections with each other. They see that they have 100-some people who have to deal with this. How do they create the right silos? Because I like silos, actually. Okay, how do you create the right silos? And then how do you create the right connections between those silos so that people aren't overwhelmed with information? Not everyone needs to know everything. But how do we make sure that the right people have the right information, that the right questions are raised at the right time? And then how do you make sure that the senior leadership of these various parties are involved in the right way? Because guess what? It's important to those companies and those organizations and their leaders, not just the team members, right? And they need help, right? So there's times where, I'll tell a story with Blend, right, where I had a weekly meeting with the president of Blend, right? It's every Friday, and we would have a quick phone call. And that was important, right? Because things would be going on their side, things would be going on my side, and we'd have a chat about it. The team may or may not even know that this is happening, right? But that connection at the senior management level, and then our connections to the team, is important, right? It's about that rigor and the efficiency and the alignment. And the last thing that came out of this particular meeting was this idea of we're not all going to be able to work on synchronized 2-week sprints on the same thing, right? In 2 weeks, one of the groups can get a lot done, right? One of the groups can't get anything done. One of the groups is on a quarterly release cycle because it's an old mainframe product, right? And one can release every day, right? So the variety of ways that people do development and the variety of schedules that they're under means that we can't all work according to a standardized shared user story list. Now, getting back to Doug's question, right? In a different situation, you could, right? And this is where leadership comes in to pick the right method for the right approach. Okay, so we're gonna, one other thing I'd mention here is that as you look at what comes out of that meeting, there's nothing technical here, right? What was missing in this team was the human side, right? The leveraging of the people's skills and knowledge, their involvement, and their interactions. That's all what it's about. Okay, so this is my time check. We are at 9:30. And Jay, you say we have another like 20 minutes or something? Are you still there, Jay?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, you got, depending on if you want Q&A at the end, you have 20 minutes or so.
Well, let's do one more. Let's try. So what I'd like to do is ask you what you want to talk about. I have a lot here. It's a whole book. So what I'd like to do is ask you what you want to talk about. So let me give you the topics and then you can go and choose, and I'll just go with the highest one. This is a rather brief topic, which is about tools, which is about roles on the team. So it's about the Scrum roles, and it's about other roles that are important. I talk a lot about the chief engineer role, which is a thing that came out of Toyota, which I think is the most important role that we're missing in most agile methodologies. So we'll talk about that, and that's just a 10-minute discussion, something like that. This is about team structures, the roles in agile, the teams. So this is about creating the right silos. How do you design the right teams? What should there be their interactions? We'll talk about the Pacifica example from the book. And then we'll talk about a few things that aren't in the book, but are certainly important. So there's a guy named Marty Kagan who wrote a book called Inspired. So he's got some ideas on how teams should be formed. And then a book I really love by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pais called Team Topologies also lays out. So this is about teams and their interactions. This is the responsibility-based planning topic. So this is how do you get multiple teams who all have different processes and different schedules and different approaches who have to work together. It's about the power of integrating events and the people-oriented approach of letting people do the work that they want to and not burning them with things that they don't need. The last one is about problem solving. So my favorite framework is called the A3, which came out of Toyota. It's a problem solving and project planning tool. And the example I have is from this project at Pacifica gets thrown off base. And the A3 section goes through what is the problem, how do we solve it, and talks about what the A3 is. So why don't you take a minute or two and tell me what you want to talk about, and I'll talk about that, and then we'll just open it up for conversation. So I'll do one more topic and then conversation. I only have 5 results so far. And there are.
I'm still here. This is Jan.
Hi, Jan.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Don't sit really here, but you talked in the beginning about, of course, agile teams usually are together, working together. And of course, since all of us are remote, or most of us are remote,
Yeah.
What's the challenges? I mean, I know the challenges we've seen where I work, but what challenges do y'all see?
Yeah, so I'm not great at talking about that right now. I think Jay would be actually better able to answer it. I haven't been working full-time since the pandemic started. And so my whole career, I've been focused on getting people together in person. So we rearranged things at US Bank so that teams were co-located in a geography and stuff like that. Because I always thought that person-to-person thing was one of the most important principles that was in the Agile Manifesto. I don't know, Jay, do you want to take a quick answer to that while people are filling out their preferences for the next topic?
Yeah, so it so happens I'm actually working at Wells to help them with their agile transformation from an enterprise level. So, and other groups that I'm working with my company. Yeah, so in the virtual world, we do have to set up these meetings and sessions, and everything that Michael said, it has to be very rigorous and planned. Of course, there's some downside to doing this, but what is so funny for me, I've been doing this for 40 years, and a couple of decades or a decade ago, I said, it doesn't matter if someone's in the office. It matters if what they're delivering and the outcome, and they should be able to work anywhere. And then the leadership, a lot of executives and management said, oh, no, we have to they have to be here in the office. We have to monitor them because we don't trust them. Well, then COVID-19 happened. And lo and behold, what happened was that, people can go off and be productive and do their work with the right technology, the right tools, if you will, and the pressure, I guess, and the impetus to make the change. I mean, this is really revolutionary, what's happening today. So to answer to your question, we're doing things now and we're figuring it out rather quickly on how to do this. And I think most knowledge workers and intelligent people in most organizations are figuring out very well. Some of the companies like Google and Twitter and Amazon and other big companies are saying, yeah, we're, people can have the option to work from home or come in dynamically, depending on what their needs are. We're going to figure that out sometime in 2021, I think now maybe 2022. But what I think this is really cool is human beings figure out the problem and they figure out the solution and they make it work. So that's my input.
And my 2 cents on it is, and my son, I mean, actually I learned this from my son. He's a software engineer, and he's an introvert, and he hated it when they had the open office space because he would just put his headphones on because he couldn't concentrate and didn't want to be interrupted all the time. Then they kind of adjusted it so it worked better. So he's working from home. He's really happy about it, but he really misses his team sometimes. So what he's thinking is that once it's okay to happen again, probably what they'll do is they'll have team days, right? Where they'll say maybe Tuesday and Thursday, we all come into the office. And then the other days we work from home, and they'll schedule the things where they need the heavy interaction on those days. And then they have the best of both worlds. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. I do think that in-person interaction, especially among multiple people, is the highest bandwidth. I believe in that principle. But I think that we can have a mixture of it that is a little more flexible than we had in the past. Okay,
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll talk about roles, then I'll wrap up. We'll have questions, okay? So this is the kind of simplest Scrum Alliance role definitions, right? So they have the product owner, holds the product value, sets priorities. You have the Scrum Master, who is the conductor of the ceremonies and is supposed to help, resolve escalated problems. And then you have the development team of whatever those roles happen to be. Okay. And I think that there's this was a great step forward many years ago. There's so much wrong with it now, I don't even want to go deeply into it. But I just want to talk through the example that we have in the book, right? And the objective that we have, right? So we're, as leaders, we're trying to get rigor, we're trying to get expertise, we're trying to build knowledge, we're trying to get good interactions. So we really want to think about what are the right roles for our work, okay? And not just who should fit these roles. Okay. So in the Pacifica case, because of the approach they took, which is that we have to have these 4 or 5 different companies and groups work together effectively, we're going to organize it around integrating events, right? What is it that we need? Okay, so the first one is the chief engineer. And the team did not come up with this idea themselves. The team expressed a lot of issues around leadership and coordination of the technology itself, right? So if you go back here, I mean, it's weird to me, right, that the development team is unspecified, right? And for those of you who heard Mary Poppendick last week, if any of you did, I know Jay did, right? She came out of engineering, right? She wasn't a consultant. She wasn't a project manager. She was an engineer. And to her, who's the engineer in charge of this is the most important question. And the idea that there's no one in charge of the technology, to her, was kind of madness. And to me, I have found it works sometimes, right? But where you have something complicated, something important, leadership is important, right? And so this idea actually came out of Toyota. And the idea of Toyota, and if you think about, this is what I found so compelling about this idea. If you think about the idea of designing a new car, right? So the Prius is a good example, or the van they did, the Sienna van, or the Lexus. What they do is they take a really senior person who is an engineer. It can't be like a someone who's not an engineer. Okay, so it's a highly respected engineer who's deeply connected to the rest of the company at high senior levels, who's really respected. You give them a small number of direct reports, things like some project managers or some organizers or some documenters or something like that, whatever they think they need to help them lead the team. And everyone is accountable to this person for the delivery, everyone technical, okay? And so the test manager, maybe they report to a test team, maybe they report to the chief engineer, right? They can report in different ways, but fundamentally the chief engineer is organizing those people and helping them with escalations and dealing with the biggest technical issues, because let's face it, we're building something technical, right? So this was brought to the team in the book by Mary, who had learned it from someone who had come out of Toyota. And it's a role that is extraordinarily powerful and valuable. So Michael G saw this in our group, right, where we started working without this role, right? And we started working without this role. And it actually happened while I was in Hawaii. So it was kind of my fault I didn't get it set up right to begin with. But we came back to find a team stuck and they didn't have any leadership, right? So they had leadership on the business side because the product manager was deeply connected to the head of the business, but there was nothing like that on the technical side, okay? So we have to create these people because our organizations historically haven't created this role. People who are deeply technical, they don't often get the leadership skills, right? Or they don't understand the business well enough to do that, or they can't communicate and lead that way. So we have to, from the beginning of our organizations, create these kind of people who are great leaders, who don't need to have a big organization, that can coordinate a lot of things with a small number of people, and can speak for the team technically outside of the team, and can help the team get the right people on it. Okay. So I don't know, Michael, if you want to maybe just mention, you know, like the role that Mark played in our project, for example.
Yeah, one of the key things, and to Michael's point about leadership, was when we didn't have the role clearly defined, we were being pulled in many directions. And so what happened was, you know, we would have one team say this, another team say this, another team say this about the same topic, and we wouldn't know what was real and what wasn't. And so when we got Mark as a chief, you know, engineer to be in play, he helped us consolidate communication and consolidate decisioning as well. Not in a way that would create bottlenecks, but the way that it would consolidate the decision and say, okay, here's the source of truth. Here are where the decisions get made. If you got 5 people coming to you, then I can help you sort through that to make sure that we're aligned and creating that alignment with everybody. It was a huge deal for us because we were creating a lot of waste, because we would say, okay, we're doing this over here, we're doing this over here, we're doing this over here, but why are we doing all these 3 things differently? And when we got the chief engineer in place, it really helped us streamline and get more aligned.
And it's an interesting combination of positional power and personal power, right? It has to kind of be both. So other things that the team did in the book is they got a test manager, right? Because they had been counseled that you don't need a test manager in Agile, right? You know, we have full stack engineers and they do the work of the testing. You don't need that. And actually, Blend early on in its life, way before Michael got there, bought this. So they had no test department, believe it or not. Okay, that changed. But so this is an important role. And then there's technical project management, right? This idea that, okay, if we're going to go Agile or we're going to go digital, whatever, we're going to take all the project managers and eliminate them all. Like some will wind up being Scrum Masters, and some will wind up getting fired, and some will wind up going somewhere else. Okay. But we're going to take the idea of project manager out of our HR system, and we're not going to have those anymore, right? Okay. I've seen that happen several times. But sometimes this is a very important skill set, right? And in the case of the book, it was. And then once you start opening up your mind to the kinds of roles you can have a systems analyst, right? I mean, one of the saddest presentations I gave was I was giving a presentation kind of like this, and they had a meeting about talk about roles, and the poor systems analyst was sitting next to me. He was probably around my age, and he'd been doing systems analysis for 40 years, and so he grew up doing, you know, data, ERD diagrams and state transition diagrams, and he had a lot of skills. And suddenly he had to be an assistant product owner. right? So he was so undervalued and so underappreciated, and his skill set was so underappreciated, he was just depressed about the whole thing, right? And so there's real knowledge and skills and specialization, right? Doesn't mean everyone needs to be a specialist, but sometimes you want to have a skill set that's been built up over decades of what it means, and it can be really valuable, right? So as leaders, we want to bring in the right expertise. We want to create that right expertise. We want to care about people and what they know, right? And then we want to have them work together effectively. Okay, so then I'm going to go all the way to my wrap up, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Just a minute, I got to go to the end. Oops, sorry. Now I lost it, or hold it. I'm getting there. Okay, so this is my wrap, and then we'll open it up for questions. So you've seen some of this. Of course, you should buy and read my book, then you'll get the whole story. But just walking out of this meeting, what are things you can do if you're an organizational leader, if you're not, to try to bring to life the first Agile value? So certainly training leaders or yourself in meeting facilitation. I think that's a great metaphor for leadership in general. Plus, because meetings are so valuable and expensive, doing them great really helps. Okay. Try a simulation. Okay. I think it's a very powerful concept. There's a whole chapter in my book about how to do it, and you can customize it to what you think your team needs. Look at your team structures and how they communicate. And there's been a lot of recent great work on this. Not everyone needs to know everything. How do you keep the cognitive load on your team low? Okay, how do you not over standardize? What's the best way to create a communication flow? There's lots of opportunities there. The next one is, how are you involving senior executives? Senior executives can help, and they care. They're not irrelevant, right? The idea is, don't just get an Agile team in a room and let them do what they're gonna do, right? You're under optimizing and you're abdicating leadership responsibility. Look at the A3 tool. It's a fantastic tool and it's very customizable. It's about a one-page view of a problem or an opportunity. It has this idea called Nemawashi, which is how you communicate and build the consensus and alignment. It is the trifecta of rigor, efficiency, and alignment. Okay, if you had to choose one thing, that's what I would choose to start on. And when we started trying to get people to be more agile, we trained everyone to do A3s. Okay, and we started expecting A3s, and it makes a big difference. I'm going to skip the physical room. I'm going to skip the stop projecting because we have to now. But the next one is get other people to do the work, right? So if you're putting together a meeting or someone else is putting in a meeting, you don't want one person to be running the whole thing. Okay. And I'm sorry, this meeting kind of was that. I'm kind of violating my own rule. Put the methods in their place. So they're good, they're valuable, they're worthwhile. There's no doubt about that. But, right, they're subsidiary to the people involved and how the people should interact, right? So, when I had the misfortune or the fortune of being 60, right, and having done this now for 35 years, so I've been through many, many methods, right? Starting with almost no method to the very simple system development methodologies to method one to information engineering. So I've seen all of this stuff and there's value in all of those things. Okay, but how do you pull the right pieces for you out of there? That's a leadership thing. And the last one is hand out lots of copies of my book and have discussion groups. That's a little joke. Okay, so this is my last page. So if you want more information, this is my website. All my books are available online, anywhere you want. The three of them: what is Lean and Agile aimed at business leaders? How do you get there? And then how do you sustain it with leadership? With
Cool.
that, I'm going to shut up and let's have a conversation if we can, huh, Jay?
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Michael. So if anyone has any questions or wants to talk, just open up your mic and ask a question. Oh my goodness. So everyone absolutely agrees with everything that Michael said. Oh my God. What?
So Jen, are you there? Can you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, this is Jen. Yeah, you answered mine about the work groups or
Yeah, this
being
is
in the
from
office.
Jen
and stuff.
Baltus about, the question is, with the introduction of Agile 2.0 and the emphasis on planning and leadership, what interactions would you recommend? So Jen, are you there somewhere? You must
Yes,
be.
I'm here.
I don't know what Agile 2.0 is.
I
So
didn't
maybe
put
tell
that-
us what Agile 2 is.
I didn't put that on there, I don't think.
Okay.
Does it show me with that?
It says Jen Baltus. Baltz?
Oh, I'm Jan Harris. Okay. Must be another Jan.
Does anyone know what Agile 2.0 is? I don't know. I hadn't heard of it. Jay, you must know. You know everything Agile.
Yeah, well, this is the new, well, there's like 3 gentlemen that are trying to create this Agile 2.0 thing, where they came up with differences on the manifesto and more from a business agility point of view. They're trying to, they're like, kind of like what Mary's saying. They're trying to say, okay, it's been 20 something years, it's time for a change. So they came up with a 2.0 version.
Oh, okay.
If you look it up on Google, you'll see the group that kind of did it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can try to answer this. So, I mean, as I think about Agile, I mean, I think Agile was pretty much an unmitigatedly great thing, right? So for those of you who were in this business before that, it was on a bad path, right? Project failure was rampant. People were using manufacturing-oriented planning techniques to do something that they didn't fit for. To go back to that balance slide I showed you. The big Accentures and stuff like that were making a fortune selling terrible project methodologies and having project failures over and over again. Carnegie Mellon had its 5 stages of maturity, which were like, they were different phases, but to call it maturity was completely wrong. It was like level 5 fit if you're going to make the space station, but it doesn't fit if you're going to build a new mortgage processing system. Right, so there was a lot of things wrong in the industry, I think, and the Agile Manifesto was, I thought, was a revolutionary statement, a cry for help, of saying we got to do this differently, and the impact it had was fantastic, right? I think that is there need for something Agile 2.0? I mean, to me, it was a statement of values was the most important thing. Right, and this is where I say Agile is not Scrum. Agile is not SAFe. Right, I think SAFe is a terrible name. Scaled Agile. It's not. It's another methodology. Right, Agile is about these principles, right, that we're talking about, and I think it's about the people and their interactions. Right, and then some of the other principles of things like one-piece flow that are really concepts out of Lean. So to me, it's like if you take the values on the value statement and you take Lean ideas like one-piece flow, error proofing, those kinds of things, you got what you need, right? So that's kind of how I see it. So do we need an Agile 2.0? I would hope they focus on the value statements and maybe the principles. And I think if Agile 2.0 would say, we have to change the name of things like Scaled Agile into something else, right? Because it's not about Agile. It's about a methodology for managing a big organization, right? And the same with Scrum. Scrum is not Agile. Scrum's a methodology. So that's what I'd say. Thanks, Jen. I'll look it up. I hadn't been aware someone was doing that.
Yeah, there's I know the last time I looked, there's 47 something frameworks and
Okay.
ways.
Yeah. And I think they're valuable. I'm not saying they're not. They are. They're really valuable. And I've used several of them, and I've seen many of them used, and they're good. But as soon as you start using them, having the team engage with it in the right way to use effectively and to adjust it over time, and to add other things if they fit, right? That's the part. I'll give one more story here, which is a little bit funny. So at US Bank, we were trying to implement a bunch of agile journeys at once, right? And the managers are all sitting in a room, and someone says, we really need to talk about standardizing. He said, well, what do you want to standardize? Well, we should have the same tool, and we should have the same sprint period, et cetera. And I'm saying, okay, so let me point you out something in the Agile values, which is at the end of each iteration, we look at our work and we make whatever changes we need to make. So let's say the enterprise says we have 2 week sprints, and someone says, I don't want to do sprints, or I want to do 3-week sprints. Does that mean they gotta convince everyone in the damn company to change? And they go, oh, okay, right? And so it's not about the methodology, it's about the people and what works for they're trying to do, right? Okay. And again, as leaders, you can't just say, here's the people, go in the room, do whatever the hell you want to. You have to make sure they're capable, right? If they're not capable, then that's mismanagement.
All right, so we're at the top of the hour. It's 8 p.m. Pacific time. For y'all on the East Coast, it's really freaking late, and you have to go to bed.
10 o'clock in Alabama.
There we go. Hey, if anyone has any feedback or any ideas, this is kind of my standard pitch of my book. I've only done this 3 or 4 times. I have one coming up November 5th. So if you have any pointers for me, drop me a line, and I'd be interested in how I can improve this. So.
Yeah. So
hey, Michael.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hey, I was about to talk to Michael about that. One of the things, Michael, I was thinking of was metrics, maybe some KPIs, and how, it changed based on the triangle framework that you had. You talked about it a little bit, but, that's one of the things I was thinking would be beneficial. Yes. I'm a data-oriented person.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of metrics, I have to say. I'm a fan of delivering things that make money for the company, right? And so I find that metrics can be very powerful, but people try to meet the metrics as opposed to meeting the delivery. Okay, so I've seen teams get so bent out of shape about, can I standardize my velocity? How many story points did I do? Who the hell cares, right? I don't care. Okay, are you getting close? What I want a team to do is to say, we're delivering this value on this date, at least we think we are, right? Are you doing it? Where are you on that, right? So metrics I find wind up focusing so much on process that it takes away from delivery. Okay? That's kind of a broad statement. It's not completely true, of course, but I think people get all bent out of shape about metrics that don't matter.
Yeah, you got to have the right metrics. I agree.
Like my boss is trying to get me to say, what should be my goal for the year, that we should do, deliveries once a day. And I go, we don't want to do deliveries once a day. I get how Google wants to do them 20 times a day, but for mortgage, I'm not going to release something every day. I can't, right? It doesn't make any sense. And so people can get the wrong metrics. If you have the right metrics, they can be nice, but I think people get carried away with them.
All right, so we're at the top of the hour. If you have any questions with Michael and you want to interact with him, you've got his connection to his URL and so forth. So do it. He's very communicative, and he'll react accordingly and build a relationship if you want.
And you can find me on LinkedIn or through my website. So.
Yeah. So thank you, Michael. Michael Levine and Michael Joe. Thank you very much. Thank you. So this is recorded. We're going to send it out to the internet and all that cool stuff so people can learn. Hopefully, if anyone has any ideas of how to use this or what we got to do next, send me a note. We have more people talking coming up, and 2021 is coming up, and I'm sure we're still going to be doing this virtually in parts of 2021. So if you have any ideas, let me know, and topics and people, let me know, and we'll get that going. Again, if you want to participate and help do the Agile 20 festival, let me know. I need help, so thank you. And again, I can't thank enough Michael G and Michael Levine. Thank you so much. And bye-bye, everybody. It's time to go to sleep or go eat something.
Okay, thank you. Great discussion.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.